All right, let's go to the phones, and we have Brian on the line from St. Louis, Missouri. And Brian, what's your question for Pastor Adriel?
Yes, Pastor Adriel, I have a very thought-provoking question. It's a two-parter. People have asked me, and I've really studied in the book of Revelation, is the United States of America mentioned anywhere in the book of Revelation, and specifically during the tribulation time? And I know I might be reaching for this one, but because of the immorality and humanity, could the United States actually be Babylon, which is mentioned during the tribulation period? Is that possible?
Hey, Brian, thank you for that question. So a couple of things. First, I would say, when we think about the book of Revelation, we need to understand why the book was written. I mean, the book initially was given by Jesus to John for the sake of comforting the persecuted church early on, encouraging them to persevere in the faith. And so I think a lot of times when we approach the book of Revelation today, we approach it as this sort of puzzle that we need to unlock the mysteries of the book of Revelation. And it's really primarily about us and the things that are happening in North America and the United States. But the reality is this book was meant to be a comfort to the Christians living there in Asia Minor for the things that they were experiencing, the persecutions that they were facing. So I think we have to understand it just in terms of the context, first and foremost, in that way. Now, that doesn't mean that the book doesn't have things to say to us and that it doesn't speak to us about the things that we experience today as well, the suffering that we might experience for Jesus Christ. But we need to understand that this book wasn't written and then given to these Christians so that they might say, oh, well, this is going to be great for believers in the United States 2,000 years from now, but it doesn't really have anything to say to me. No, this was a very relevant book for the Christians then, and it has been for Christians throughout the history of the church who are experiencing suffering and persecution as they take up their crosses and follow Jesus. Now, with regard to Babylon, mentioned throughout the book of Revelation, and the identity of Babylon, it's this political machine, this nation, if you will, that causes the peoples to engage in idolatry and sexual immorality. And so in one sense, I think that we could say that any nation that does this throughout human history can in that sense be associated with Babylon. I don't think we have to find, one specific referent for Babylon. For the early Christians, I think primarily this is referring to Rome. And you think specifically about the kinds of things that Rome was doing early on, especially some of those persecutions that came after the first couple centuries of the church, where Christians were commanded to engage in idolatry. And if they didn't, they would be killed. And many of them were killed. And so, I think that the best way to understand Babylon throughout the book of Revelation is this sort of picture of these political nations, these totalitarian states, if you will, that call the people of God to engage in idolatry and call them away from Christ. And that was certainly what was happening, to the believers there in Asia Minor. And so they're being encouraged by Jesus and by John to persevere in their faith. And we need to do the same thing. And so, so I think when you understand the book in that way, you realize, okay, this has some real relevance to the Christians who were living there at that time, but it also speaks to us because we can be led astray by the spirit of the Antichrist, as John says in 1 John, and we need to be vigilant and wise as we continue to pursue the Lord in our own lives. Thank you, Brian, for your question.